Welcome to CPG, the Cannabis Packaged Goods Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
Well, welcome to the Cannabis Packaged Goods Podcast, Meredith. So happy to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me here.
Well, why don't we dive right in? Let's start with the origin story of Lantern. How did it come to be, and how did you find yourself at the helm?
Great question. Well, the story of Lantern includes the story of Drizzly, which is the largest alcohol e-commerce marketplace and delivery platform in North America. It was founded in Boston in 2012 by two Boston college grads, and they operated and kind of grew the business over 7 or 8 years, and then realized in 2018 that they had built this really powerful technology platform to deliver regulated product. And so where else should they apply it? Obviously, they should apply it to cannabis. We're based in Boston. 2018 was right around the time that cannabis, it had been legalized a couple years earlier. It was becoming operational right here in our backyard. So the realization was it was a natural next step to take for the Drizzly technology. Drizzly had also really done things the right way in alcohol, and they had gone out and created really deep regulatory relationships. Many of those regulators are the same or very adjacent to cannabis regulators. So Drizzly as a whole had a great reputation out there in the world. So kind of decided to do it in 2018. 2019 was spent setting up the business. We actually, Lantern, operate fully separately than Drizzly, the alcohol side, both owned by the same holding company, but there was like a lot of governance stuff to do. And then we launched in 2020 in May for medical delivery here in Boston. It was, it's not a big market, but it was a way to test out product market fit, make sure that, everything was kind of working. We were testing some marketing channels. I joined right at the beginning of 2020, and I honestly had not really been pursuing a career in cannabis, although now that I'm in it, I can't imagine being anywhere else. But my background for my entire career has been in retail, B2C companies, originally brick and mortar, then digitally native, then omni-channel. So I've spent 20 years plus thinking about the customer journey and how customers shop, the psychology of that, and how to solve hard consumer problems. And if you think about cannabis, e-commerce, and delivery, that's all of those things. And it's just been really fascinating to think about how the customer shops for this, how they understand it, how they interact with it online, et cetera. And so that's what gets me up every day thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's such an emerging category, even though cannabis has been around and consumed for ages, but a legal market with branded products and goods, and a framework for people to walk into the store and purchase products. Even myself, who's been involved in the cannabis industry for over a decade, I still walk into a store or I'm browsing online and really trying to discover things and learn things. And I think you think about all the new consumers coming into the category, plus the existing consumers that are just exposed to all these new brands, new products, new formats. There is a lot of the customer journey that needs to be thought through. With Lantern, how do you guys approach that? Is it through an app, through the app, through the website, and just kind of how you present products? Do you do some education in there as well?
Yeah, so what we're aiming to do with Lantern is create the first/only real marketplace experience for customers that doesn't actually exist out there today. The only ways people mostly shop online for product is through dispensary websites where you only see their menu. And what we're doing is creating the way that people shop for product in every other category in their lives. Beauty, CPG products, clothing, you name it, you're shopping in a marketplace like Amazon, Target, Walmart, Sephora, etc. So customers will naturally want to shop for cannabis that way. We are aggregating dispensary menus onto Lantern and then presenting them in a way that looks like a very familiar shopping experience to customers. So that's one of the ways that we're trying to normalize cannabis online e-commerce, is that we're creating kind of the shopping flow that you're using on any other kind of site you're shopping. You're able to look for new brands. You're able to compare prices. You can see customer reviews. When you ask about education, yes, this is such an important component of shopping online or offline for this product, but particularly online, we're trying to create the better bud tender experience. Like when you shop in a dispensary, it's different by state, but let's take Massachusetts for a minute. There's just a lot of points of friction when you go to a dispensary. There's a long line behind you. The bud tenders are really busy. In Mass, they can't show product, so you get this menu, like a laminated menu, and you can't really take a lot of time. So if you're shopping on Lantern, you can see all the information you need. There's obviously a lot of content that sits off to the side, but what we're trying to do is embed the right content at the right points in the experience that the customer knows what they need to know. They can create an order with confidence, and they know that they'll like their order when they get it.
Yeah, and it's an interesting anecdote about Massachusetts, and even in specific markets, the experience can be so different store to store. Sometimes it's more of a medical experience where there's a waiting room and it's a one-on-one experience with a bud tender, and then you have the random luck of which bud tender do you get, and often some of their thoughts and opinions kind of influence your behavior and like what they drive you towards, and that's always kind of a random experience. And other shops are more self-service, where you can walk in and kind of explore, and if you have a question, maybe flag someone down. So having kind of a well thought out, comprehensive marketplace that can cover, sizable area, like you guys do with Lantern, I could see that's really compelling for the consumer. With yourself, you actually founded Birch Lane under Wayfair, and I think you mentioned Lantern was founded under Drizzly. What are some of like the advantages or maybe disadvantages of having a parent organization kind of as a sponsor company?
Definitely pros and cons. I think the main pro is that you're around people that have done it before. You have funding, you have technology, you have cross-functional support. You just really have people around you, and it's de-risked, right? Like you're not raising a bunch of money independently and then going out and trying this untested thing. It can be easier to recruit talent because you've got the backing of an established company. I think though that, the cons are that you can get pigeonholed into the way that the parent company has always done business, and that can hold you back from innovation. The other thing is that usually the companies are at very, very different stages, and the problems they're trying to solve for the customer, but also internally with people operations and benefits and all those things, they can be very different. Drizzly, for instance, we were far apart when we started Lantern, but Drizzly has grown just incredibly fast over the last year and a half. So the gap between the two companies has gotten pretty wide. They are actually being acquired by Uber. That deal is in process. So when that deal closes in the fall, Lantern will spin out and become its own fully independent company. So it was a good time for that to happen for us, I think.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I'm sure Drizzly and kind of the world we're in, this kind of pandemic, or maybe out of the pandemic, maybe going back into the pandemic, but delivery, we saw these trends in cannabis, and I'm sure you guys did too. More people purchasing online for pickup, for delivery, and I'm sure for alcohol, same thing was happening at a large scale, kind of national scale, where we have national scale, but certain states don't have a cannabis framework quite yet. So that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned you've been happy in the industry. Can't imagine yourself in another industry. Has the experience been at all what you expected?
It has not been, but it's been so much better than I expected. I think the people in this industry are incredibly talented and creative, and they have to be because it's such a mess of regulations and marketing. A lot of marketing channels, and supply chain is weird. So every person you meet who's had any success in this industry has had to be very innovative in a way that I've not seen in other industries. there's also just a very high level of passion for the product, the plant, for the social equity component of the business. The equity component for Lantern is actually incredibly kind of like important and big part of what we do. So that was another thing that really just motivates me and is exciting. I'd love to see more women in the industry and more people of color at the executive level. I would say I think that's lagging behind where I've been in beauty and in furniture and in apparel. They're a little further ahead there, but hopefully we'll get there at some point soon.
Yeah, I could see that. And it's kind of like tech, and your organization's an overlap of tech and cannabis. So it kind of has some of the same trends and underrepresented, certainly by females or minority populations. And there's a lot of social equity programs, and we'll get into that because I know that you guys in Massachusetts have quite an interesting program there, and all these other states are trying. Well, not all of them. Many of them are, but some aren't. And the ones that are, I feel like, depending on the state, are doing better than others. And so I'm excited to dig into that with you. And I couldn't agree more. Like, constraints, encourage creativity. And this industry is all about constraints. Like, marketing for Lantern, even in a regulated market with Drizzly and Lantern, I would imagine that Drizzly has a little more flexibility on the ways they can, market and advertise. And that's a challenge for any organization in cannabis, but it does just make everybody have to perform even better in the world that we're in here. So, cannabis, we kind of talked about the online kind of experience. It's a complex product, right? We have different form factors. You have vapor pens and pre-rolls and beverages and just flower. Then you have the strain dynamic, right? So these different strains and all the nuance of the strain, the different effects, dependent on the strain, potency. How does Lantern think about that, and as far as like surfacing that kind of information to the consumer?
I think the key thing is what is the information that consumer needs at what point, and serving it up to them in a way that it's really digestible, snackable content is a thing, and not overwhelming the customer with information because they don't care. Like we're doing a lot of user research right now around how customers shop and what they need to know to make a decision quickly. I mean, I think a lot of D2C sites they convince themselves that customers are going to want to read like all this blog content. They're going to want to read these long these product detail pages. Think about how you shop. Like, you're on your phone, you're waiting in line at the supermarket. Like, you just want to get through that funnel. So to me, the key pillars for a great customer experience in cannabis are a familiar shopping experience. So you already kind of know how the site works, feels like any other site, that content in the right places. And then, again, having this better experience than the dispensary. Our competitors are not other delivery and e-commerce companies because there's just not that many of them. What we need to do is convince customers that their purchasing experience and share of wallet that they're giving to cannabis would be better spent. Their experience would be better with Lantern versus going into a dispensary. So we need to frankly be better.
Yeah. Cannabis being so nuanced, I guess you can kind of equate it with something like wine. Like, a lot of people just want a good bottle of red wine, and maybe they know it's going to be a cab or a Syrah or something, but that's kind of the extent of it, right? They're not talking about all the nuance of wine, where cannabis could be similar, right? Where you can get really kind of nerdy with it and really into it and drill down. But a lot of people just kind of want to know, well, this one make me sleepy, or this one, keep me awake, and just like getting them through that funnel in a frictionless way. So that's great. You guys are focused on that. You mentioned D2C, so direct to consumer businesses. One of the trends we're seeing, and I'm sure you're seeing it too, and particularly in markets like California that have a model for brands to be able to distribute to consumers, How do you think about that? You mentioned Lantern as a marketplace. Maybe I can get introduced to lots of brands. Do you guys see that as complementary when a brand has their own kind of channel to the consumer? Are they able to leverage Lantern at the same time? Is Lantern thinking about supporting brands that might want to go direct to consumer?
Yes, I mean, brands are one of the reasons that marketplaces are successful, because as consumers' knowledge and affinity for brands grows, they rarely, more times than not, they go to a marketplace to find those brands and compare brands versus going to the brand websites. Brands who have their own websites and do their own D2C business, it gives that brand a lot of brand equity and it elevates their brand. So, I'm not even just thinking about cannabis. Like, I was in beauty before in a marketplace, running a marketplace beauty company, but we also really relied on those beauty brands to create their brand positioning and all that through their own direct-to-consumer sites. So they should definitely coexist. Brands and Lantern do go hand in hand. What we're seeing, we're more operating on the East Coast and in Michigan and Colorado, where the brands, the trajectory of brand awareness for those brands is much earlier than it is in California. So I think we're actually coming into the market, we Lantern, at the right time, right at the same time when a lot of brands are growing. One thing we've seen, we kind of came on the scene the same time infused beverages came on the scene, and you have a few brands now that have sort of national recognition, and it's just really fun to see that. And we are seeing customers searching for those brands, and we're able to sell them. So I think it's a really good mix.
Yeah, it's certainly early for brands and brand loyalty, and that's a really interesting anecdote about you're seeing people search for specific brands with a national footprint, because we're kind of waiting for that. Here at Headset, I know it does exist with certain organizations, but it's the fragmentation of the market it makes it challenging, right? If you ask someone in Michigan name a vapor pen brand, and you ask someone in California, they might name the same brand, but most likely they'll name a different brand. And to see some of that converging, and I think there's a lot of trends that are pointing that direction. Some of these multi-state operators that have a large footprint, that I think we'll begin to see more and more of that. But it's still for sure early days. And Drizzly, and comparing it to like an Uber Eats or some model like that, when I think about those types of marketplaces, like a food marketplace, restaurant to restaurant, and restaurant may have its own kind of dishes, that you're kind of that, when you think about Lantern, that would be like dispensary to dispensary, and this dispensary sells this and this dispensary sells that, but they're different. Where Drizzly coming in, and I can see how it's such a good parallel to cannabis, because you're looking for a brand. And, a lot of liquor stores might sell the same brands, which is different than an Uber Eats model or a DoorDash, where, a lot of restaurants are selling different dishes. I mean, you could maybe say, well, you can get California rolls at a sushi place, but, often you're kind of like, I want to order from this restaurant for this specific dish. So the parallels are really clear at that kind of brand level. So it makes a lot of sense how you guys migrated into that. Speaking of Uber and Uber Eats, you mentioned, the acquisition. And I know the CEO of Uber, Dara I'm going to mangle the name, but it's Khosrowshahi, mentioned, he made a big waves in the industry. If you remember his comment about legalization and, would they get involved? And they said, certainly we would look at that in a post, federally legal world, which why wouldn't they, right? But, those are big headlines for people in our industry. Given the relationship with Drizzly and given the relationship, Drizzly and Lantern, is that something that is an opportunity for you guys, or is that somewhat of a competitive risk in the new future?
Yeah, I mean, Uber wants to deliver everything that can be delivered, and that's what they should be thinking about. So cannabis was obviously something they should be thinking about. I think, well, first of all, they won't be able to engage on it really at all until federal legalization. So, depending on who you talk to, that's a few too many years out. I think for Lantern, we don't have a relationship with Uber in any way other than just any diligence stuff we're doing for the deal to close. But we are too early. We Lantern are too early in our trajectory to even think about any sort of acquisition or strategic partnership. We need to create a lot of value to the consumer before we even think about that. Like, we're only operating today in 3 states, Colorado, Michigan, Mass. We need to just deepen those states and expand our footprint more. But yeah, it'll be fascinating to see what happens when these big public companies can get into it. I still think, alcohol has been legal for 100 years, and it is like a messy regulatory landscape. And the reason that Uber is acquiring Drizzly is because they went at it a few times without success and realized that you really have to understand the industry and the regulations to be successful. So I see a similar thing happening in cannabis later. You'll have a handful of Lanterns, and you'll have the Ubers and the DoorDashes and the Amazons, et cetera. And, I would anticipate that those big guys won't build, they'll buy, but we'll see.
Yeah. And you're right. The fragmentation, the regulations, who knows, in a federally legal world, we could be in a situation where it's hard because it's still state by state, and to scale that is challenging. It would take a lot of time on their own. So I could see how acquisition would make more sense at that point in time. I want to talk a little bit about the social equity component. You kind of touched on some of that. In Massachusetts, it has a pretty good component to the industry where they have the economic empowerment applicants can get, I believe it's delivery licenses. And you know better than I do, being directly in Massachusetts there. Is that accurate? Is that how they're rolling that out?
Yeah. So just to give a little more detail, recreational cannabis delivery has to be done by third-party delivery companies. Dispensary employees can't do it. And those third-party delivery companies have to be owned by social equity and economic empowerment candidate applicants. And those licenses are only, so those licenses can only go to those equity applicants for an exclusive period of 3 years, and that will probably be extended. So there's 3 license types in Mass. There's social equity only, and all 3 of them have a delivery component associated to them, and they have an exclusive period. So we really like that. We advocate for it. We run an incubator program in every city that we operate in. So Denver, Detroit, Boston. We're working with social equity applicants and entrepreneurs that want to start delivery businesses. That was kind of the first remit, but now we've expanded that incubator to include all license types. And what we're doing is we're facilitating the program, but we're bringing in experts. We're not experts at everything. So we're bringing in legal experts to help with the licensing process, finance and capital folks, operational people, like you name it. It's almost like a 101 of how to create your business and run it and then raise money. I think it's really needed, and we're running it ourselves in Mass. And then in Detroit and Denver, we've partnered with really incredible local advocacy groups, and we're taking more of a backseat. They're the face, and it's their network and it's their community. And we're saying, hey, this is the programming we ran in Mass. Like, let's partner together to bring that programming to the community. I think the thing that is not great about Mass, and actually is not great at all out there anywhere, is this lack of access to capital. There are no good, solid capital solutions right now. And you can train and mentor and accelerate and incubate all you want, but if the entrepreneurs don't have access to capital, it's just not going to get off the ground. And the capital we're seeing out there is actually pretty predatory. You're getting these terrible deals that are getting presented to these entrepreneurs, and it's just, they're in a hard spot because they don't have other alternatives. So future states need to solve this capital problem. Yeah,
with the recent introduction of legislation, or the draft legislation from Cory Booker and others, there was some talk from Cory Booker about not wanting to go down like a safe banking path. and you kind of walk that back a little bit because it was kind of an all or nothing. But I think you bring up a great point. We want to get there with full federal legalization. You want to have that social equity component. And I think his opinion on the safe banking was that it might help the rich get richer, right? Because you're just like supporting that. But there are a lot of entrepreneurs out there, smaller businesses, social equity applicants that, are penalized by that as well. And so, seeing him kind of walk back on that statement is good. And, hopefully there is some kind of intermediate step if this legislation isn't the one in the near term to solve that problem. Do you think the Massachusetts structure would roll out, should roll out everywhere? That kind of 3 years, in new markets, you got New York there legalizing soon, and they've got the micro licenses that are coming out. But would you recommend it? Is it something that would work?
I think it's a good start. I think that carving out delivery as a social equity exclusive license type is a good start because it's really the lowest capital way to get into the business. It's much lower capital than a grow or a dispensary. So you have entrepreneurs that have a lower barrier to entry. It's, however, also pretty hard to make money in delivery because it will be a race to the bottom on price once you get a lot of people, a lot of businesses in market. So I think that the mass is a great start. You need to pair those delivery license exclusive periods with retail license guidelines, one for one social equity for one non-social equity, or in Detroit, they're working through a lot of legal issues around residency requirements and legacy operators. But I think they need to carve out, ratios of licenses for communities of color and social equity entrepreneurs. And then this capital thing, nothing's going to, Mass hasn't solved that. No state has. They're trying to solve it, to your point, at the federal level. That piece has to get solved.
Yeah, certainly. And the interest in the industry, you probably have the same experience getting into it, kind of realizing, how much of an impact prohibition's had on certain communities, and the social equity piece is a real important piece. And a lot of companies talk about we're gonna change the world, and certainly many do. But these are lives that are pretty ruined because of this. So it is such an important piece. So it's good that I feel like Massachusetts is doing something. It's rare I hear stories where people are pretty happy with kind of the structure. And I remember in Massachusetts when it was first introduced, there was a bit of pushback from some of the retail organizations, and I think everyone kind of got on side, at a certain point. So that's pretty exciting stuff. And speaking of other states, I'm here in Seattle, Washington, one of the original, legal markets with Colorado, and we have no delivery, and it's a real pain. And I would love delivery. How does Lantern think about that? You mentioned Colorado, Michigan, Massachusetts. Obviously, California has a delivery framework, but are you looking at markets like Washington? Is there any hope for us from policy change?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, it's been an interesting change. The early markets did not legalize delivery, and they had to go back to their regs and add it. Or Colorado, only one municipality is actually allowing delivery today. That's Aurora. There, it's an opt-in by city kind of thing, so it's moving very slowly. But that's an example of a state that legalized, then had to figure out delivery. Same with Massachusetts. But what you're now seeing in some of the states that are going to come online in the next couple of years, we're anticipating delivery is going to be part of the regs out of the gate. And I think it's just the way that the consumer market has evolved over the last 5 years, right? Less than that, 2-3 years. Delivery has grown exponentially throughout COVID, and it's really through Amazon Prime and Uber Eats. People expect that their products that they want will be delivered to them sitting on their sofa in an hour. That's just what we expect now. But with regard to what we're doing, it's pretty expensive to do a wholesale change in a state. So we are actually spending our advocacy dollars mostly on social equity causes and not causes, but like getting the regs written for social equity the way we think they should be, and making sure that, we're focused on newer states. But yeah, I mean, we would love Washington, Illinois, like those would be two big ones too. If delivery was legal there, we would love that.
Yeah. Well, maybe since I'm in the neighborhood here, I could start to get involved and see what we can do, because it would be. You're absolutely right. Everyone expects it, and it's a strange thing, I think, at this point, especially when you can look at other states and see how effective it is. So hopefully sooner than later. So you guys recently launched for adult use cannabis in Massachusetts. I saw that as a headline, and I believe it's in partnership with some of the social equity applicants there. So that's really cool. Is there anything on the horizon as we kind of wrap it up here for Lantern that our listeners should be prepared for?
Yep. So if you're in Boston, we're adding more dispensaries, probably 3 or 4 more by the end of the year. We're working on our app, and so that will be launching by the end of the year. Denver will be launching end of the year, early next year. New Jersey, we're starting to work on. So I would say in the markets we're in, expansion and new markets include Denver, New Jersey.
Very cool. And with the recent Apple App Store changes, are you guys able to have an app where you can actually transact and do it all within the app now?
Yeah, there's some rules around it. You have to geofence the areas that allow delivery and transacting, so that you can't just like open up transacting to like anyone and everyone. But yes, we will then be able to build it in a way that people can transact on the app.
Well, great. Well, I'll get those laws changed here in Washington, and I'll look for a Lantern to show up soon. Meredith, it was such a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining, and it was great to learn all about Lantern.
Great to meet you. Thanks so much.
Thanks for joining CPG, the Cannabis Packaged Goods Podcast. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.